My boss called me replaceable. Then his biggest client called me. There are moments in life when a single sentence changes everything. Mine came on a rainy Thursday morning in downtown Chicago. My boss looked me straight in the eyes, leaned back in his leather chair, and smiled like he had already won. "You've done good work, Ethan," he said, "but don't confuse being useful with being irreplaceable." He paused just long enough to make sure I was listening. "Everyone's replaceable." I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. At that moment I honestly believed I'd just lost the best years of my career. What I didn't know was that within 72 hours, the biggest client our company had ever signed would call my personal phone. And that phone call would destroy everything my boss thought he controlled. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 32 years old, and for almost 7 years I worked for a business consulting firm called Hawthorne Strategic Partners. If you've never heard of companies like ours, that's actually a compliment. When we're doing our jobs well, nobody notices us. We solve problems before they become disasters. We help companies save millions of dollars. We negotiate contracts. We fix broken operations. We calm furious clients. And then executives stand on stage, accept awards, and pretend they did it all themselves. That was my job. Not glamorous, not famous, just essential. Or at least I thought it was. When I started at Hawthorne, there were only 30 employees. By the time I left, there were almost 150. The company had tripled in size. Our revenue had exploded. Our client list included hospitals, logistics companies, manufacturers, and tech startups. People assumed Richard Hale, the CEO, was some kind of visionary. Maybe he was. He certainly knew how to sell himself. Richard had the perfect executive look. Tailored suits, expensive watches, white smile, confident handshake. He could walk into a room and convince strangers he was the smartest person they'd ever met. Investors loved him. The media loved him. Employees, not so much. Because behind closed doors, Richard had one rule. People were assets. Assets could be replaced. Feelings couldn't appear on balance sheets. Loyalty couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. So loyalty didn't matter. I should have left years earlier. Looking back, there were dozens of warning signs. Birthdays forgotten. Vacation requests denied. Weekend meetings announced Friday night. Promotion promises pushed back just one more quarter. Every time someone resigned, Richard gave the same speech. If they left, they weren't committed. Funny enough, the people who stayed were the ones doing the work of 3 employees. My wife, Claire, used to tell me the company didn't deserve me. I'd laugh. Every company is like this. She'd shake her head. You've just convinced yourself that's true. Claire worked as an emergency room nurse. She saw people on the worst days of their lives. Maybe that's why she recognized burnout before I did. She noticed little things. That I answered emails during dinner. That I woke up checking Slack before saying good morning. That I canceled weekends because a client needed something urgent. One night she asked me something that stuck. If you disappeared tomorrow, would they even send flowers? I joked back. They'd probably ask where I saved the spreadsheets. She laughed, but neither of us thought it was funny. There was one client everyone inside Hawthorne knew by name. Atlas Healthcare Group. They weren't just another account. They were the account. 5 hospital networks, thousands of employees, expansion projects across 4 states, annual consulting contracts worth millions. Losing Atlas wouldn't just hurt. It could cripple the company. Officially, Richard managed the relationship. Reality was different. Every executive at Atlas called me, not because I had the biggest title, because I answered. Midnight, I'd answer. Sunday afternoon, I'd answer. Christmas Eve, unfortunately, I'd answer then too. I knew every department head, every operations director, every finance executive, every problem they'd ever had. I wasn't just their consultant. I'd become someone they trusted. That distinction would matter later, more than anyone realized. One Monday morning, Richard called an executive meeting. He walked into the conference room smiling. That usually meant somebody else was about to have a terrible day. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "our revenue is up 28%. Everyone clapped. "Our operating costs are still too high." The clapping stopped. Richard clicked the remote. A slide appeared. Efficiency initiative. Corporate language for layoffs. No one spoke. Then Richard smiled again. "The good news? We won't need to fire many people." A few relieved faces appeared around the room. "We'll simply expect more productivity from the people who stay." There it was, the Richard Hale philosophy. Spend less. Demand more. Call it leadership. After the meeting, my friend Marcus caught up with me near the elevators. Marcus worked in operations, one of the smartest guys I'd ever met. He glanced over his shoulder before speaking. "You know who's getting promoted?" I shrugged. "No idea." He laughed. "I do." "Who?" "Richard's nephew." I blinked. "What?" "He starts next month." "Does he have consulting experience?" Marcus actually laughed. "He sells luxury watches online." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Brandon Hale arrived. 26 years old. Perfect haircut. Designer shoes. More confidence than competence. Within 2 hours, he'd introduced himself as future leadership. By lunch, he'd already interrupted 2 senior managers. By Friday, he was giving advice to people who had trained Fortune 500 executives. Richard adored him. Every terrible idea Brandon suggested was called innovative. Every mistake became a learning opportunity. When anyone else made mistakes, Richard called them liabilities. The first time Brandon attended one of my Atlas meetings, I knew we had a problem. Atlas's chief operations officer, Linda Brooks, was explaining delays in one of their expansion projects. She wasn't looking for blame, she wanted solutions. Halfway through her explanation, Brandon interrupted. "Honestly," he said, grinning, "you guys are overthinking this." The room went silent. Linda slowly looked at him. "I'm sorry?" Brandon leaned back. "If this were my company, I'd just cut half the approval process." I closed my eyes for 1 second, because I already knew what was coming. Linda folded her hands. "And how many hospital systems have you managed?" Brandon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The meeting became painfully awkward. I stepped in immediately. I think Brandon was trying to simplify the process. What he's really pointing out is that we may have opportunities to reduce administrative delays without affecting compliance. Linda looked at me instead. "That's a much better answer." Crisis avoided. Barely. After the meeting, Brandon slapped my shoulder. "We make a great team." I forced a smile. "No. We survive because I keep translating what you mean." He laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. That evening, Richard called me into his office. "I heard you embarrassed Brandon." I corrected him before he embarrassed the company. Richard's expression hardened. He's learning. So was I. Silence. Then Richard stood. "You know what your biggest problem is, Ethan?" I waited. "You think clients stay because of you." I didn't answer. Because I knew something he didn't. Atlas never asked for Richard. They asked for me. Every single time. But saying that out loud would have sounded arrogant. So I simply nodded. "I understand." Richard smiled. "Good, because nobody here is bigger than this company." As I walked toward the door, he added one last sentence. One I wouldn't truly understand until much later. "Don't ever mistake loyalty from clients for leverage." I left without saying a word, because I still believed hard work would speak for itself. I had no idea. My hardest test wasn't keeping our biggest client happy. It was surviving the man who believed every employee was disposable. And before the month was over, he was about to prove exactly how little he valued the person keeping his company alive. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning. It started with an email. Subject: Atlas Healthcare Executive Review, Leadership Update. Normally, I organized those meetings. I prepared the reports. I built the presentations. I answered every difficult question. This time, my calendar invitation had been removed. I thought it was a scheduling mistake. Then Marcus appeared at my desk, holding his coffee like it was bad news. "Ethan, they replaced you." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Marcus lowered his voice. "Richard put Brandon in charge of Atlas." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. "That's impossible." "I wish it was." I looked toward Richard's glass office. Brandon was already inside, laughing. 5 minutes later, Richard called me in. He didn't even ask me to sit down. "Effective immediately," he said, "Brandon will be leading the Atlas account." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. Richard, Brandon has been here less than a month. He needs experience. So you're giving him our biggest client?" Richard folded his hands. "And you'll support him." I almost laughed. "Support him? You know the account better than anyone. So, I'll do all the work, and he'll get the credit?" Richard's smile never changed. "That's how leadership development works." "No, that's how exploitation works." The room became silent. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Ethan." "I am." "No," he replied. "You're emotional." That sentence hit harder than I expected, because I'd heard it before. Every time someone pointed out an obvious mistake, Richard called them emotional, as if facts stopped existing the moment they became inconvenient. The Atlas executive review began at 10. Brandon walked into the conference room like he'd closed a billion-dollar merger. I sat quietly beside him. Linda Brooks, Chief Operating Officer. Michael Grant, Chief Financial Officer. 3 regional directors. The Hospital Expansion Committee. People I'd worked with for 6 years. Linda smiled when she saw me. "Morning, Ethan." Before I could answer, Brandon interrupted. "Actually, I'll be taking the lead from here." The smile disappeared from Linda's face. "Oh?" Richard stepped forward. "Ethan's focusing on internal strategy now." It was a lie. Everyone in the room knew it, but nobody challenged it. Not yet. Everything began falling apart. Brandon mixed up 2 hospital projects, quoted outdated financial numbers, mispronounced the names of senior executives he'd supposedly been managing. Then came the worst moment. Michael Grant asked a simple question. "What contingency plan do you recommend if construction costs increase another 8%? It wasn't a trick question. We discussed it dozens of times. Brandon smiled confidently. "I don't think that'll happen." Silence. Michael blinked. "That's your strategy?" "I prefer optimism." Across the table, I watched Linda slowly remove her glasses. That was never a good sign. She looked at me instead. "Ethan, what do you think?" Every eye in the room turned toward me. I hesitated. Richard was staring directly at me. One wrong sentence, and I'd undermine Brandon. One dishonest sentence, and I'd betray the client. I chose the client. "We've actually prepared 3 contingency models." I opened my laptop. "If material costs increase between 5 and 10%, here's our recommended adjustment." The atmosphere immediately changed. Questions became productive. Solutions appeared. The meeting recovered. Mostly because everyone ignored Brandon. After the clients left, Richard exploded. His office door slammed so hard the glass shook. "What the hell was that?" I looked at him. "I saved the meeting. You undermined Brandon. I protected our client. You embarrassed him. He embarrassed himself." Richard stepped closer. "No. You made him look incompetent." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He is incompetent." The words escaped before I could stop them. Richard's face turned red. "You forget who you're talking about." "No. I remember exactly who I'm talking about. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't back down." The next 3 weeks were exhausting. Officially, Brandon led Atlas. Reality, every emergency still came to me. Every late-night phone call, every contract issue, every operational crisis, every executive concern. Brandon forwarded everything to my inbox, sometimes without even reading it. He'd walk past my desk and say, "Can you just handle this?" Then he'd disappear into Richard's office. An hour later, Richard would congratulate him for excellent client management. I stopped correcting people. I simply kept working. Not because Brandon deserved it, because Atlas did. Claire noticed the change immediately. One Friday evening, I came home after almost 13 hours at the office. Dinner had gone cold. Again. She looked at me for a long time before speaking. "When's the last time Richard said thank you?" I couldn't answer. "When's the last time he asked how you're doing?" Nothing. "When's the last time he admitted you were right?" I sighed. "Claire, no." She sat across from me. "I want you to hear yourself. You're keeping someone else's business alive, and they're treating you like you're lucky to be there." I rubbed my forehead. "It's complicated." "No, it isn't. They need you. The only person who doesn't realize it is the man signing your paycheck." Monday morning, 7:14 a.m. I arrived early to prepare for another Atlas strategy session. As I walked toward my desk, I heard voices coming from the conference room. Richard, Brandon, and 2 board members. The door wasn't completely closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. Richard laughed. "Ethan worries too much." One board member asked, "Can Atlas really transition that easily?" Richard answered without hesitation, "Of course, they're loyal to Hawthorne, not Ethan." Someone else chuckled. "What if he quits?" Richard didn't even pause. "Then we'll replace him." Brandon laughed. "Honestly, I've already learned everything he knows." The room erupted with laughter. I stood completely still. Not angry, not yet. Just disappointed. 7 years, thousands of hours, missed anniversaries, canceled vacations, countless weekends, reduced to one sentence. "We'll replace him." I walked away before they noticed me. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about promotions, or raises, or recognition. I was asking myself one question. What exactly am I still fighting for? 3 hours later, I got my answer. Atlas's executive committee had requested an emergency video call. A serious issue had surfaced with one of the hospital expansion contracts. Millions of dollars were at risk. Normally, I'd lead the discussion. Instead, Richard looked at Brandon. "Your account, you handle it." Brandon smiled confidently. Then he whispered to me, "If things get complicated, jump in." He still didn't understand. Things were already complicated. He just hadn't noticed. And before this day was over, neither he nor Richard would be able to hide behind me anymore. Because the biggest mistake of their careers was only hours away. The emergency meeting started at exactly 1 p.m. 23 people joined the video conference. Atlas executives, hospital administrators, construction partners, legal advisors, finance directors, everyone who mattered. The atmosphere felt different. Nobody was smiling. Linda Brooks got straight to the point. "We've identified a serious issue with the Eastbrook Medical Center expansion. A contract amendment had been approved using outdated pricing formulas. If left unchanged, the mistake could cost Atlas nearly $8.4 million over the next 3 years. Linda looked at Brandon. "You've been leading this account. Walk us through your recommendation." Brandon froze. For the first time since he'd arrived at Hawthorne, there was nowhere to hide. He clicked through the presentation. Wrong file. Opened another. Still wrong. His hands started shaking. The numbers changed this morning." Michael Grant frowned. "No, they changed last week." Silence. Brandon looked toward me. The same look he'd given me a dozen times before. "Save me." I slowly closed my notebook. Not out of revenge. Because this wasn't my meeting anymore. Richard had made that perfectly clear. Brandon cleared his throat. Ethan, you've been involved. Richard interrupted. No. Everyone turned toward him. He isn't responsible for this account anymore. For a second, nobody spoke. Linda slowly leaned forward. I'm sorry. Did I hear that correctly? Richard smiled. We've transitioned leadership. Linda's face didn't change. I wasn't asking about leadership. I was asking why the only person who actually understands our business, isn't speaking. The room fell completely silent. Richard's confident smile disappeared. He tried to recover. Brandon has been training under Ethan. Michael looked confused. For how long? Richard answered. About a month. Michael looked at Brandon. How many of our executive planning sessions have you attended? Is that 3? How many acquisition projects have you personally managed? None. Linda looked back at Richard. So let me understand this. You removed the consultant who's worked with us for 6 years, and replaced him with someone who has never managed a healthcare expansion. Richard forced another smile. We're investing in future leadership. Linda didn't smile back. We're investing 8 figures. Those aren't the same thing. The meeting ended without a solution. Atlas asked for 48 hours. Not to make a decision. To decide whether Hawthorne was still capable of handling their business. The second the video call disconnected, Richard exploded. My office. Now. He slammed the door so hard the blinds rattled. What the hell was that? I looked at him calmly. You wanted Brandon to lead. He needed help. I wasn't allowed to help. You should have stepped in anyway. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You told everyone I wasn't responsible for the account. I expected loyalty. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind people make when reality becomes ridiculous. Loyalty? I gave this company 7 years. I missed family holidays. I canceled vacations. I answered client calls at midnight. I trained people who earned promotions over me. And today, you blame me for a meeting you wouldn't even let me lead. Richard's face hardened. You've developed an attitude. No, I've developed self-respect. That was the moment everything changed. He pointed toward the door. If that's how you feel, then maybe this company isn't the right fit. I nodded once. Maybe it isn't. Then he said the sentence I'd remember for the rest of my life. You're replaceable, Ethan. I looked him directly in the eyes. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I actually felt sorry for him. That's where you're wrong. He smirked. Security will walk you out. 7 years, reduced to 1 cardboard box. A framed wedding photo. A coffee mug Claire had given me. A notebook filled with ideas the company now owned. Marcus met me in the parking garage. They actually fired you? I nodded. I'm sorry. I smiled. Don't be. I think they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. At the time, I wasn't trying to sound dramatic. I honestly believed I was unemployed. Nothing more. Telling Claire was harder than losing the job. She listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, she walked over and hugged me. For a long time. Then she smiled. I'm proud of you. I looked confused. I just got fired. No. You finally stopped letting someone convince you that your worth depended on their opinion. Sometimes, the people who love you can see your value long before you do. The next 2 days were strangely peaceful. No emails, no emergency calls, no midnight meetings. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. I updated my resume, reached out to a few former colleagues, started wondering what came next. Then, on Monday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number, Chicago area code. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. This is Ethan. A familiar voice replied. Ethan? It's Linda Brooks. I sat upright. Linda? I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Not at all. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you leave Hawthorne, or were you pushed out? I stayed silent for a second. I was terminated. Another pause. Then, I thought so. My stomach tightened. What happened? Linda took a deep breath. The last 48 hours have been a disaster. Nobody can answer our questions. Projects are stalled. Deadlines are slipping. And every time we ask for you, they tell us you're no longer available. I didn't know what to say. Then she asked the question that changed my life. Ethan, would you be willing to meet with our executive committee tomorrow? I frowned. In what capacity? We're considering ending our relationship with Hawthorne. We'd like your professional opinion. I took a slow breath. I don't work there anymore. I know. That's exactly why we're calling. The meeting took place the next afternoon, not in Hawthorne's office, at Atlas headquarters. For the first time in 7 years, I walked through those doors without representing someone else's company. Linda greeted me personally. So did Michael. So did the CEO. They didn't treat me like a former consultant. They treated me like someone they trusted. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, the CEO leaned forward. Ethan, I have one final question. If you were in our position, what would you do? I answered honestly. If your priority is stability, you need a team that values your business more than office politics. Nobody spoke. The CEO nodded slowly. That's exactly what we were thinking. 3 days later, the announcement became official. Atlas Healthcare Group terminated its multi-million-dollar consulting agreement with Hawthorne Strategic Partners. The decision shocked the industry. Richard immediately called an emergency board meeting. According to Marcus, he spent hours trying to convince everyone it was temporary. It wasn't, because Atlas didn't leave alone. Within 6 weeks, 2 regional healthcare providers followed, then a manufacturing company, then a logistics client I'd quietly helped for years. Not because I asked them to leave. I never did. They simply reached out, one after another. Every conversation started the same way. We heard what happened. Then, we'd rather work with you. A month later, Linda called again. This time it wasn't about advice. Our board approved something. We'd like to build an internal strategic consulting division. She smiled. And we'd like you to lead it. Was almost double what I'd been earning. Full executive benefits, profit sharing, a team I'd get to build myself. I accepted, without hesitation. 3 months later, I attended a healthcare leadership conference. Hundreds of executives, dozens of consulting firms. As I walked through the lobby, someone called my name. I turned around. Richard. He looked different, tired, older. His expensive confidence had disappeared. Ethan, can we talk? I nodded. For a minute. He looked uncomfortable. We've had a difficult quarter. I heard. We lost several key accounts. I heard that too. He forced a weak smile. I may have underestimated your contribution. I didn't answer. After a long silence, he finally said it. I was wrong. Those 3 words were all I'd wanted to hear for years. Strangely, they didn't matter anymore, because I no longer needed his approval. I only needed my peace. I smiled politely. I hope you figure things out. Then I shook his hand. Not because he'd earned forgiveness, because I refused to carry resentment into the future. As I walked away, I heard him say quietly, I really thought anyone could replace you. I stopped. Without turning around, I answered, you could replace the employee, but you never understood why the client stayed. Then I kept walking. People often think revenge is about making someone suffer. It isn't. Real revenge is living so well that the people who underestimated you are forced to watch from a distance. Richard lost clients. He lost credibility. Eventually, he lost the company he'd spent years building. Not because I destroyed it, because he built a business that depended on loyalty, while treating loyalty as if it had no value. As for me, I finally learned something I'd been too exhausted to understand before. Your greatest professional strength isn't how hard you're willing to work. It's recognizing the difference between being needed or valued. And once you find a place that values you, you never settle for being called replaceable again. The end.